Chapter 9: The Lion, the Witch, and the Anvil. The next few months were a hotbed of activity. Robert went along with our suggestions without much of a fuss. He declared the dissolution of House Greyjoy after the attack and sentenced Father to join the Night's Watch. At the same time, he announced that the newly formed House Oradoom would be granted rulership over the Iron Island, and that I was named Lady Oradoom, head of House Oradoom. The changes came with a wave of controversy, rumors, and marriage proposals. Robert sent a raven from Bear Island to Winterfell, which instructed Tyrion Lannister to return to Casterly Rock. Tyrion was also forbidden to drink or partake in whores until such time as he would be introduced to me. A week after the attack on Bear Island, Robert returned to Winterfell with Ned in tow, before they began to make their way back to King's Landing. The Oradoom fleet returned to the Iron Island, and I took up residence in the highest point of Castle Pike. It took many days of discussions to explain things to the remnants of my brother's fleets, to convince them that what had happened was done for the good of the Iron Island and the Iron-born. It didn't hurt that I increased their wages and shares while lowering the tax the Iron Island would take from their goods at the same time. Making people richer, even if only marginally, was always an excellent way to get them to see you as a better option. By the time the month had passed, the patrols were back in full swing. I had sent reparations to Bear Island in the form of dry goods from the arbor, which could be stored for some time in case of winter. I'd also had some of the ships damaged during the fight left to the Mormonts, so that they could do more fishing. Ships were expensive, but they made for excellent bargaining chips, especially to people who were already grateful for your assistance. Bear Island hadn't lost that many men thanks to our warning and our interdiction, so the reparations weren't as costly as they might have been. It took a few weeks for new sails, banners, flags, and the like to be made with the new sigil of House Oradoom, a gold anvil surrounded by 6 white stars on a navy blue field. I had new outfits made for myself in order to look the part of the head of a great house. House Oradoom was going to establish itself as one of the houses that the kingdom simply could not live without soon, and I was determined to ensure that everyone knew it. I ennobled Alan and Serena, allowing them to establish their own minor houses. Alan established House Amel, whose sigil was a red hand with a yellow flame above it on a white field, and whose words were, "From cinders, rise." Serena established House Cosland, with her sigil being a white dove over blue waves on a yellow and white field. House Cosland's words were, "March towards glory." I granted both of them the estates of my brothers, with Alan getting Balin's estate and Serena getting Victarion's. I began negotiations with the coastal houses whose daughters had lost their Greyjoy fiancé or spouses, because they were technically part of House Greyjoy. I spent a few days at each of them, negotiating with them to become part of House Oradoom. I explained many of my plans to build small port cities within their territories should they remain with us. Ports meant business, business meant taxes, and taxes meant more money in their pocket. More money in their pocket meant more influence. Power begets power, after all. Alan even agreed to take on one of the better-looking women as his wife, which would link House Amel to House Oradoom immediately. Favorable negotiations meant that House Oradoom had several new castles, lands, and ties to smaller houses within only a few months of its existence. This was all busy work, however. The piece de resistance, however, came when all of those negotiations were over with. I stood on deck of my flagship, dressed in a navy blue gown with gold and silver patterns. My hair was worked into a single thick braid, which had cloth of silver woven through. Gold jewelry set with precious stones were worked into the braid and hung from an elaborate necklace. I'd ensure that the dress had been designed so that the sleeves would show off my muscles whenever I bent my arms enough. Victarion's cloak was clasped to a brooch on the front of my gown, its many layers of gold cloth tentacles writhing in the sea breeze. I might be a proper lady now, but I didn't want anyone to look at me and see someone soft. There needed to be that edge, which would remind them that they were dealing with someone who could give as well as they could get. Tommen stood nearby, dressed in the finest armor I could forge. The steel was thin, but worked in such a way that it would deflect all but a ballista shot, with very minute amounts of Valyrian steel worked into the metal to give it an edge even against those rarest of weapons. He looked like a knight out of a fairy tale with his years of experience and training, molding him into one of the best fighters in the Seven Kingdoms. The ship went through the process of docking at Casterly Rock, and I did what I could to make the process easier by calming the currents around the area. A procession of retainers and servants disembarked the ship, followed by Tommen and myself. As I stepped onto the dock, I found a large contingent of Lannister soldiers standing in formation, resplendent in their crimson and gold armor. I smiled and made my way over to them. As I neared them, the front row parted with a snap to reveal Tyrion Lannister, dressed in his finest red and gold. He looked rather irritated when he was revealed, and his expression grew more sour when he set eyes upon me. I played the professional, stopping only a yard or so from him, and dipped into a deep curtsy. "Lord Tyrion, I presume..." "I am Lady Merida." "Is this some sort of joke?" Tyrion snapped. "Did my father set all this up? Did he and Lady Oradoom think this would be some sort of amusing jest at this situation?" I remained low in my curtsy, affording him in slightly submissive posture. "I'm not sure what you mean, my lord. Perhaps you would like to clarify your question for me." He stepped forward and pointed an accusatory finger at me. You're a dwarf. Your lordship is as perceptive as I've been told," I chuckled as I raised myself back up to a standing position, clasping my hands in my lap demurely. "Why are you here?" Tyrion demanded, the perceived blow to his ego obvious. I simply smiled at him. "I am here to discuss our marriage, my lord. I am Lady Merida Oradoom, known more colloquially as the smallest kraken." Tyrion sighed, the edge from his voice softening with every syllable. I could see him mentally chide himself, and he bowed his head by way of apology. "I was under the impression that the nickname referred to your age, not your stature." A chuckle escaped me, and I nodded in understanding. Most people think the same thing. King Robert was kind enough to insist that no one disparage me for my height. "I suppose I should have gotten on his good side some time ago as well," Tyrion mused. "It would have saved me some grief." "Not much grief if your reputation is to be believed," I smirked playfully. Tyrion cracked a smile. "Well, I do come with some redeeming qualities regardless of what you may have heard." "So I hear," I said as I waved Tommen forward. Tommen stepped up and offered Tyrion a large book. "This is a gift for you, my lord," I said with a grin. "The lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms, with descriptions of many high lords and noble ladies and their children." "Rather a mouthful," Tyrion replied as he looked over the cover. "As are you, if the rumors are to be believed," I quipped with a smirk. Tyrion paused and looked at me, a smirk playing at the edge of his lips. "My Lady Oradoom, that was quite the unladylike response." "I am dressed as a lady, but am I very much ironborn, my lord?" I said confidently. I motioned to the book. "I've read through this and found something quite interesting. I'm told you're quite the scholar on top of being an avid reader. I'm hoping you'll catch what I did in the passage I marked when I read it, and that the implications might please you." Tyrion canted his head curiously, his expression showing his intrigue was growing. "My lady brings me two gifts in one, it would seem. I'm afraid I hadn't considered getting you anything." I barked out a laugh, no doubt because you've had to go without your typical leisure activities for some months now. I expect you were rather upset with me for setting those conditions. "I admit to some irritation," Tyrion smiled, "but it seems that the wait was worth it. My father has prepared rooms for you and yours. He has also planned a feast for this evening in your honor. May I escort you to your chambers?" "That would be lovely. Thank you, my lord," I replied. Tyrion handed the book to one of the guards and hooked his arm around mine. We climbed the many steps up the deep cliffside to Casterly Rock. We spoke about small topics, mainly focusing on our interests, books we'd read, and about how we'd been spending our time over the past few months. We parted ways once we finally arrived at my quarters, so that I could rest and wait for the feast that evening. Tyrion promised that he would begin reading the passage in the book I marked. As a guest, I had essentially free reign of the castle, but I remained in my quarters with Tommen, resting and going over topics of conversation that might come up during the feast. It would be a few hours before the feast began, and when it did, I was surprised to find that it was Tyrion himself who came for me, and not a servant to tell me the feast was about to begin. "Lord Tyrion," I said with a smile, "this is a surprise. What brings you to my quarters?" Tyrion bowed his head. "I thought I would escort my betrothed to the dining hall. Give everyone an entrance to remember." I chuckled and offered him my hand, which he took and began to lead me through the castle. "I read that passage you marked for me," he said nonchalantly. "Indeed?" I asked. "What did you think of it?" "Intriguing, to say the least," Tyrion hummed. "So intriguing that I began to read the rest of the book. I compared what I read to my knowledge of the families mentioned and the individuals I've met from those families. Rather accurate, I should say," I smiled. "In the most excruciatingly dull manner as possible," Tyrion agreed with a chuckle. "But I can't help but wonder what the point of that precise package might be." I laughed and tossed him a smirk. "I can't believe that for even a moment. Your proclivities may claim the lion's share of the rumors about you, but your intelligence and wit have their own share of rumors. I'm quite sure you understand the implications." "I understand the ramifications of those implications," Tyrion mused as he took a moment to look me over. "Do you, my lady?" I nodded and flashed the prettiest smile I could muster. "I do indeed. There's a reason I wanted you to look it over." "Still," Tyrion said, and I swear I saw him blush. "Without proof, such accusations would serve only to upset the realm, and King Robert is your friend, or so you say. Why would you wish to put him through something like that if you couldn't prove it?" "Because I care for my friend deeply," I responded. "And I have proof. I've been collecting the proof for nearly 16 years now." Tyrion stopped and looked at me suspiciously. How is that possible? I smiled softly at him, enjoying the fact that I could finally look someone straight in the eyes without having to crane my neck. "You must have heard rumors about how my god shows me visions." "I prefer to not entertain such flights of fancy, if I can help it." Tyrion shook his head. "I assumed they were rumors meant to make you seem like some mad soothsayer." I laughed and put my free hand on his. "Well, I'm sure some of them are exaggerated to do just that. However, the drowned god does send me visions and dreams, and he has done great things for me and the Ironborn now that magic is active in the world once again." Tyrion looked at me skeptically, though there was the desire to want to believe me, simply because I appealed to him. "And it has shown you these things?" "It led me to the book," I clarified. "I did not understand the book until the king became prolific. That's when all the pieces fell into place and, I must confess, began to dislike your sister from afar." Tyrion chuckled. "Cersei does rather have that effect on people. But why dislike her and not the king for his indiscretions?" I sighed and looked at Tyrion with a desperate, longing expression. "The reason is terrible beyond words, and I do not wish to cast those aspersions lightly and risk losing a husband whose intelligence, wit, charm, and stature match my own." "You forgot looks," Tyrion chuckled sadly, understanding the weight of what I might be thinking and using the jest to ease the mood. An amused huff escaped me. "Perhaps, but I'm still the prettier one between us, though you would be quite handsome with a beard." "I'll consider it, my lady," Tyrion smiled softly. "But if the reason is so terrible, why would you wish to marry into our house?" I arched a brow. Into? I don't believe the message was delivered correctly, my lord. I'm not marrying into your house. You will be marrying into mine. The king didn't establish House Oradum only for it to be so quickly snuffed out. Did your father not explain this? Tyrion let out a sigh and shook his head. No doubt he was looking forward to seeing my face when he made the announcement tonight. I canted my head and offered him an encouraging smile. Try to think of it this way. You may not be a Lannister after we're wed, but everyone in your house will love and adore you. This brought a smile to Tyrion, who looked at me in a new light. I must confess, my lady, that does sound like a wonderful exchange. More than fair, since you'll get to see me every day as well, I giggled, which got him to laugh. He led me to the dining hall and escorted me through the center to stand before the head table where his father, Tywin Lannister, sat. There were others at the table as well, but no one from the head family. They were all likely back in King's Landing by now. Father, Tyrion bowed his head. May I present to you my betrothed, Lady Merida Oradum of the Iron Island. I lowered myself into a perfect curtsy. Lord Tywin, it is an honor to finally meet you in person. Thank you for having me here in your home. Your hospitality is greatly appreciated. Tywin glared at me, his expression calculating but neutral. He has no cause to be angry with me, nor did he have reason to be cross. He hummed in approval. Lady Oradum, stories of your exploits over the years have reached us here at Casterly Rock. Is it true you recently slew your brother Victarion in single combat? I knew what he was trying to do. He wanted to see if I would fluster at the accusation of parricide in front of all the noble guests. I raised myself from my curtsy and lifted my chin with pride as I gazed at Tywin. I did indeed, my lord. He and my brothers Euron and Balon turned traitor, attacked another house unprovoked, and threatened the king's peace. It was my duty to stop them. I am told your brother was quite the warrior, Tywin replied, equal to Sir Gregor Clegane if the stories tell true. I smiled politely and nodded. He was indeed, my lord. And yet you claimed to have bested him in single combat, Tywin mused. Forgive for saying so, but I have my doubts considering your stature. I smirked and looked at Tyrion, who seemed like he was growing upset. People our size are capable of great things, so long as we get the opportunity. I'm told that my betrothed has made your sewers the envy of the Seven Kingdoms. One wonders what he could do if given real responsibilities. I'm sure you'll have ample time to find out, Tywin sneered. Please, join me at my table. I would speak with you. With the subtle combination of confrontation and insult out of the way, the rest of the people gathered for the feast went back to their conversations, and Tyrion led me around to the table. I sat immediately to Tywin's right, while Tyrion sat next to me. You didn't have to go to so much effort, my lord, I said as I took my seat. I would have been happy with a smaller, more personal dinner. Nonsense, Tywin refuted. When my son's betrothed comes to us for the first time, a feast is the very least I could do. After all, this is only the second time a king has taken one of my sons from me for their own political gain. I nodded in understanding. I remember the day Sir Jaime was named to the king's guard. I told my father that no good could possibly come from that decision. Ah, Tywin looked at me. That's right, I remember now. The Mad King set you against a knight to earn your family name. You surprised everyone with your victory over Lord Celtigar. A smile crept across my lips as I remembered that fight. I recall hearing about that, Tyrion chuckled. Some said you would grow to be as skilled as my brother Jaime one day. I hope I'll never have to find out, I replied. I looked up at Tywin. It would seem that kings are rather keen on the idea that your sons should not inherit Casterly Rock, my lord. Perhaps I could help with that? The king has commanded Tyrion to join your house, Tywin snarled quietly. As he will no longer be a Lannister, he will no longer be able to inherit anything from House Lannister. I was not referring to my lord, but to your son Jaime, I replied diplomatically. Tywin scoffed. After hearing about everything you've been doing for your people, Lady Oradoom, I had thought you had some sense in that head of yours. But if you don't know what joining the Kingsguard entails, then I'm afraid this conversation will be short and unproductive. I felt Tyrion's hand on my shoulder and looked at him. His expression told me that I was treading on a sensitive topic, but I gave him a reassuring smile. Just as I was about to reply, I spotted another golden thread hovering in the air. It wound its way out of the dining hall, and something told me to invite Tyrion and Tywin with me if I decided to follow it. I smiled up at Tywin. I understand the problem with the Kingsguard, but I believe there is a solution to that problem. I stood and folded my hands into my lap. Would you care to follow me? I would like to show you something that might change your mind. Tywin looked at me as if he were considering if he even wanted to consider entertaining me. He pursed his lips for a moment before patting his hand to the table. Very well. He stood, and the rest of the room stopped what they were doing and stood in respect of Tywin. He waved for them to continue doing what they were doing as he and Tyrion followed me out of the room. I had no idea where I was going, apart from following the golden thread that they apparently couldn't see. To fill the silence, I decided to make conversation. Out of curiosity, Lord Tywin, if I were able to get Jaime out of the Kingsguard, would you be willing to hear a suggestion as to who he might marry? That is rather presumptuous of you, Lady Merida, Tywin said with his typical taciturn tone. However, if you were able to succeed in such a miracle, I would be willing to entertain the suggestion, if nothing else. I smiled wide. I would appreciate that a great deal. I understand that he is quite the desirable prospect, and you could demand a high price for his hand. However, I believe I know the perfect person for him. What would this suggestion cost me? Tywin asked scrupulously. I looked back over my shoulder at him, just a little faith. Are we going to the mines? Tyrion asked abruptly. I smirked at him. Are we? I chuckled and continued, to down into the castle's depth, till we finally found one of the entrances to the mines. I would prefer if we didn't go into the mines, Tywin said, as we approached the gated entrance. I turned and looked up at him, an innocent smile on my face. May I ask why? I knew why. I didn't need to ask. But he didn't know that. And now I understood why the thread brought me here. I'd rather not have our presence disturb the miners, Tywin protested. Miners? Tyrion scoffed. At this hour? It wouldn't matter the hour, I told Tyrion. There won't be any miners regardless of the time of day. I looked up at Tywin. Would there be, my lord? Tywin scowled, and I could swear I'd never seen anyone's face ever look so sour. I looked back at Tyrion. The mines ran out a few years ago. House Lannister has no more gold. It is behind, held up by reputation, debts owed, and your father's rather taciturn nature when it comes to being slighted. Tyrion whirled on Tywin and looked up at him. Is this true? Tywin looked like he wanted to throttle me then and there. His face was twisted with anger as he formulated a reply. I'll save you the trouble of trying to think of a lie, I said as I turned to look at the mine's entrance and began to stroll in, pushing the gate that had it closed off aside. The drowned god sends me visions. Dreams sometimes. You see, thanks to him I've known for some time that the mines ran dry. I continued into the mine, grabbing a torch and lit it with a spark of magic. As an actual dwarf, I could see in the dark quite easily. Tyrion and Tywin, however, could not. I made my way a few 100 feet into the mine, mentally chiding the miners for the inelegant method and sloppy setup. Humans were terrible at working stone. It wasn't their fault, of course. They weren't connected to the stone like we were. I ran my fingertips over the mine's wall, silently contemplating what I was going to do. Lady Oradoom, Tywin spat, I must insist that we leave this instant, and that you forget anything about outmines. I turned to look up at Tywin. my expression polite but professional. How much were these mines worth when they were discovered, Lord Tywin? What? Tywin sputtered. The total worth of the mines, I repeated. Your house has existed since the Andal invasion, some 6,000 years or so. It's been mined every day for all that time. That would have to put its original value in the billions, yes? 6? Possibly up to 10? Lady Oradoom, I am growing increasingly impatient with this stunt of yours. What is your point? Tywin demanded, clenching his fist so tight I could see his knuckles go white. I am willing to beseech my God to restore your minds, I said matter-of-factly. I am his mouthpiece, his avatar. I make few requests of him, but those I do make, he fulfills. Tywin barked a mocking laugh that was devoid of any hint of humor. You expect me to believe that if you wiggle your fingers, your god will simply make gold reappear in these mines? I steeled my gaze, and the expression caused Tywin to take half a step back. I would appreciate it if you didn't mock my god, Lord Tywin. And, no, that is not what I'm saying. This is not my desire. It is you. My faith is not what will spur the drowned god to act. It will need to be yours. Mine? Tywin asked, his tone a bit more respectful. How do you mean? I placed my hand on the stone and used my stone manipulation to hunt for gold. I found a small vein a few 100 miles away and brought it to me. I whispered a small prayer for show and pulled a nugget that was smaller than the nail on my pinky from the wall and showed it to Tywin. The drowned god is generous, I said as he took the nugget from me. That is all I asked for. But I have seen that if you pray to him and are genuine in your belief that we will give more, that he will fill these mines once more so that your family can continue to enjoy its wealth and position for another 6,000 years. Do you truly think I should... Tywin began before Tyrion interrupted him. My lady, may I ask a question? Tyrion asked quietly. Of course, I smiled. You were born on the island of Pike, correct? He posited, before it became part of the Iron Island. I nodded. I was indeed. Tyrion looked to Tywin, his expression asking for patience. He focused on me again, intrigue in his eyes. Did you ask the drowned god to unite those islands into a single landmass? My smile spread, appreciating his insight. I did indeed. My purpose was to unite the Ironborn, and is now to spread his word now that he is active in the world once more. There are houses close to the crown already who have converted to worship of the drowned god. House Lannister would not be the first, but it will benefit from it the most. All it takes is the smallest amount of faith. Would the drowned god settled for me asking? Tyrion asked. I chuckled and reached out to take his hand. I'm afraid the Lord of House Oradoom is not the Lord of House Lannister. Oh, Tyrion replied with slight surprise. I didn't realize we were married already. Someone should have told me. I laughed and squeezed his hand. I can only tell you how the drowned god perceives the situation. I looked back up to Tywin. The request must come from you, Lord Tywin. A few moments of faith, an honest request to the drowned god for the future of your family and your house. And your minds will be restored. I knew the one thing that Tywin cared about was his legacy. He cared about leaving behind a prosperous house that his family could use, keep their standing. With the mines empty, it meant that his highest hopes now were that his grandchildren, by Robert, would be the kings of Westeros. But he could renew the mines. Tywin genuinely surprised me when he moved to his knees and closed his eyes. His tone was confrontational, but I couldn't help but feel the honesty in his plea to anything that would help his family. If it will restore our minds and guarantee the prosperity of my house, then I swear to the drowned god that I will keep the faith. So let it be, I say softly, and touched the stone wall again. I reached through the world and pulled gold into the mine, filling it and creating veins that stretch for miles. The light from the torch soon began to reflect off of the gold. "By the mother," Tyrion whispered in awe at the display. Tywin opened his eyes and looked genuinely shocked. He stood and ran his fingers over the newly renewed gold. He looked at me. "It worked?" I smiled up at him. "Keep the faith, Lord Tywin. The drowned god grants powerful boons to his most devoted followers." "So it would seem," Tyrion said as he looked around the mine with awe. "I don't know what to say," Tywin whispered. "You say thank you," I chuckled. "Multiple times a day if you can. Pray to the drowned god and speak your desires to him. The more you dedicate yourself to him, the greater your vision will come to fruition. He has already shown me a lion in King's Landing sometime in the future." Tywin turned and looked down at me, and I swore I could see something of desperation in H's eyes. "And Jaime? Will he be able to rule in Casterly Rock?" I could see Tyrion's disappointment in response to Tywin's question. I couldn't blame him, but I can say that so long as you have faith in the drowned god, Jaime can likely be freed from his vows. Tywin nodded, reaffirming his decision to take the chance at lowering himself to asking for the drowned god's boon. "Very well. Should you help free Jaime from his vows, I will give great consideration to your choice of wife for him." I smiled wide and dipped into deep curtsy. "That is all I ask, my lord." "Oh, and one more thing if you're feeling generous." Tywin's brow arched suspiciously. "And what might that be?" I walked over to Tyrion and slipped my arm into his before leaning against him. "We would like a wedding that would make the king blush. After all, you can definitely afford it now."